Hello everyone, and welcome to Media Matchups. Tonight we're going to be delving into who would win in a fight between the double champ himself, Conor McGregor, and the martial arts legend, Bruce Lee. Conor often praises Bruce Lee's life lessons and skill in martial arts, and claims that if Bruce Lee were to be resurrected, he would demolish the current MMA. But in a straight up fight between the two, who's coming out on top? Well, that's what we plan on finding out today. Now, it's important to say that a real-life fight isn't like a fictional power-scaling battle, where feats are more concrete and you can ignore pesky things like the laws of physics. And in something like an anime battle or a comic book battle, feats are a lot more cut and dry and easier to lay out, but you can't really do that for real-life fighters, as power scaling doesn't work one-to-one with the real world, and discussions like this fall more into the fight science, MMA discussion type battle, more than an online battleboarding type battle. Also important to mention is that this fight's going to be a street fight, not an MMA match or anything like that. So no arguments like Conor wins this because he understands UFC rules better, or something like that.
Otario, otario! Otario, otario! You know what that means? Pussy.
Conor McGregor is a former double UFC lightweight and featherweight champion. Originating from Ireland, Conor in his prime was seen as one of the most dangerous and ruthless fighters in the entire UFC lightweight division. At least until, events happen. Conor McGregor retired with a 22-6 win-loss ratio. Of his 22 wins, a massive 19 of them were by knockout. So for all the opponents Conor McGregor won against, a whopping 86.4% of them were knocked out. For comparison, Mike Tyson, one of the most prolific knockout artists in heavyweight boxing history, has 50 wins and 7 losses, with 44 of his 50 wins coming from knockout, giving him an 88% knockout rate. So pretty much, Conor McGregor is almost as good of a knockout artist as a prime Mike Tyson was. For how hard Conor McGregor can actually punch, we've unfortunately never really measured the strength of his punches. As far as I know, nobody has put him on one of those punchometers from the Rocky movies, but there are some estimates we can make. Measurements of other UFC fighters and professional boxers find that most professional fighters on Conor's level and weight class can punch with around 800 to 1000 joules of energy. For a bit of context as to how strong that actually is, punching a fist-sized hole through a human head requires about 800 joules of energy, and feats such as breaking bones, kicking open a door, and even clean decapitation all fall lower than this. So yeah, if Conor really wanted to, he could theoretically punch a fist-sized hole straight through your head. So remember that next time some bodybuilder on TikTok is claiming that he's stronger than a UFC fighter, because he probably isn't. For speed, Conor should at minimum scale to other professional MMA fighters and boxers, who typically throw punches at about 25 to 30 miles per hour, with Conor often being able to react to and dodge said punches. Conor is mostly a boxer, and it's his main bread and butter in fights. Conor is mainly a southpaw stance boxer where the right hand and right foot are forward, allowing for easier right jabs and combo opportunities. Conor also often uses his large reach, speed, and aggression to physically overwhelm opponents, as well as using his incredible defensive skill to often force people into making poor attacks that he can capitalize on. But Conor isn't just a boxer, as he has mastery in various different martial arts, which includes, but is not limited to, MMA, kickboxing, karate, and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Many people try to downplay Conor's skill on the ground, since of his 6 losses, 4 of them were through submission. However, this is just a misrepresentation of how Conor actually fights. He's not bad on the ground. He actually has some pretty impressive defensive groundwork and does have wins from submission, so he can fight on the ground if he has to. He mostly doesn't simply because he doesn't have to. He's stylistically more of a striker, and much of the martial arts he's skilled in focus more on strikes rather than takedowns. Conor's fights rarely even need to go to the ground, as he can often just beat the shit out of his opponent standing up. Not only that, but many of the people who beat Conor with submission holds are people who specialize in that type of martial arts, such as Dustin Poirier or Khabib this word. These guys are mainly wrestlers or Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighters and use that style of fighting in combat often. So it's not that Conor is bad at the ground game, it's just that most of the time he's going up against really fucking good ground players, which he simply doesn't have the skill set to counter. But Conor is not bad at the ground game. He's plenty skilled in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and can take down people with submissions. He's done it before. But throw him against somebody better at ground fighting than him and he can't do much. Now, knowing a lot of martial arts is all well and good, but if you aren't actually good at them, then there's really no point in having them. But lucky for Conor, he is absolutely extraordinary. Keep in mind, the UFC is filled with some of the greatest fighters on the planet, and most people in the UFC are absolute masters at their martial arts. Yet despite this, Conor was capable of holding 2 titles in 2 different weight divisions and was able to defend both of them. Conor has fought against debatably some of the best MMA fighters on the planet, such as Khabib, who has 29 wins and 0 losses. Now, granted, Conor lost against this guy, but he did go a solid 4 rounds with this freak of nature, and even held the advantage for a good chunk of the fight. Conor has also beaten Dustin Poirier before, who's one of the greatest Thug Jutsu and BJJ fighters in the entire UFC, and was able to go 5 rounds with Makovic, again another absolute monster with a 27-1 fight record, and is notorious for having defeated some of the best fighters in UFC history, as well as being one of the greatest wrestlers on the planet. Keep in mind, Dustin Poirier went 5 rounds with this guy, and Conor has beaten Dustin before. However, Conor's most impressive feat and his claim to fame was knocking out Jose Aldo, a former featherweight champion who defended his title and went undefeated for 6 years straight. And Conor was able to knock this guy out in 13 seconds. So yeah, Conor has definitely proven himself to be one of the most elite fighters on the planet, and his fight catalog and sheer training in martial arts is something that's extremely impressive.
I said empty your mind. Be formless, shapeless, like water. Now you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put it in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend.
Lee Jun-fan, better known as Bruce Lee, is one of, if not the most globally recognized martial artist of all time. He was one of the biggest influences of martial arts in the West, and is widely considered as the founding father of MMA. Now, Bruce doesn't have an official win-loss record because that wasn't kept, but we do have witness accounts and even video of some of Lee's greatest feats. One of his more notable ones, which we actually have video on, was that he was strong enough to casually send people back fair distances when punching from only 1 inch away. Even just these 1-inch punches were capable of generating approximately 300 joules of energy. For comparison, your average untrained dude can typically punch with only around 60 joules of energy, give or take. This means that even Bruce's weaker punches are still 5 times stronger than what a typical man could generate. And other moves such as the 6-inch punch would be even stronger, with some calculations of this feat getting it to roughly 700 joules of energy, though when you include the friction of the chair against the floor, it's likely even higher. It has even been stated that Bruce Lee could hold a 75-pound barbell out in front of him for several seconds, which is something even the strongest bodybuilders have trouble doing. There's also stories of Bruce Lee punching so hard that he made a 700-pound punching bag hit the ceiling of his dojo, which, if you calculate the energy required to do that, would need around 6.4 kilojoules. That is roughly 3 times stronger than what Francis Ngannou can hit with, and it was said that Bruce Lee could do this casually. There are also claims that he could punch harder than someone swinging a sledgehammer down as hard as they can, with sledgehammers being able to demolish skulls and shatter bones with ease, even when used by normal people. But possibly most impressively was Bruce Lee's feat of splitting a 45-kilogram sandbag in half in midair with a sidekick. Bear in mind, even the world's strongest kick, performed by Shogun Rua, is unable to split a sandbag, with Shogun Rua's kicks generating around 3.7 kilojoules of energy. Yet just Bruce's sidekick was able to split a 45-kilogram sandbag completely in half. It's also important to note here that a sidekick is one of the weakest kicks you can throw out. They aren't damaging, at all. They're used more to space you and your opponent out more than anything, and they aren't used to damage people, and they have no force behind them. So just Bruce Lee's sidekick is stronger than the current world record in strength, and that type of kick isn't even designed to damage people, so just imagine what something like his roundhouse kick could generate. This also doesn't even take into account Bruce's blinding speed. Bruce would frequently land attacks on highly skilled karate masters faster than they could even react, and it was considered nearly impossible to react to his strikes until after he had already thrown them, and that he pretty much just couldn't get hit. There are even stories of him taking a coin from somebody's hand and replacing it with a separate coin before the person could even close their hand. And there was once a story on the set of Green Hornet that Bruce Lee had to slow his movements down because the cameras at the time weren't capable of capturing his movements. He was literally moving too fast for a camera to capture, which is ludicrous. Like, not even Metro Man can do that shit, dude. Bruce was also a master in various martial arts, mainly in forms of karate, Wing Chun, Tai Chi, boxing, taekwondo, and his own self-made martial art, Jeet Kune Do, with Bruce having deep knowledge in each martial art, being able to match and even defeat other martial artists who had been training for decades. With all of this, it's no wonder why Bruce Lee has such a legendary reputation, and to this day is still considered as one of the greatest martial artists of all time.
I'd like to take this chance to apologize to absolutely nobody. The double champ does what the he wants.
You're the one with the big mouth, and I would really enjoy closing it, especially in front of all my friends.
So now that we have looked at the strengths and weaknesses of both fighters, we can determine who would win in a fight. And I think it's important for us to make the distinction between what is and isn't reliable to use for Bruce Lee. Keep in mind, Bruce Lee was before the era of heavy video recording, and so there isn't much actual video backing up his feats. And much of the feats that people claim Bruce Lee has accomplished are, well, let's just say iffy at the very best. Now, this isn't meant to disrespect Bruce Lee at all, that's not what I'm getting at here, because he was a genuinely good fighter and pioneer of martial arts in the Western world. But many of his more superhuman feats that we mentioned kind of fall apart when you think about them with any amount of logic. Bruce Lee was only 5'7" and about 130 to 140 pounds, which kind of makes many of his feats questionable, such as the feat of him punching a 700-pound bag so hard it hit the ceiling. A feat like that just isn't possible for someone Bruce's size. Even if you gave Bruce Lee Usain Bolt's running speed and had him sprint at the bag and hit it with his whole body weight, he still wouldn't be able to generate that much energy. Same with Bruce's sidekick. Just his sidekick alone would already be the strongest kick ever recorded, surpassing Shogun Rua's full-powered back kick, which is one of the most powerful kicks a human can possibly throw. You're telling me that 130-pound Bruce Lee's sidekick was stronger than the 205-pound light heavyweight monster Marcio Rua's back kick? Yeah, sure. Because of this, we'll be splitting this match into two parts. The first part will be using a more grounded and realistic version of Bruce Lee, and will only focus on what we know as a fact. So this includes stuff such as video recordings we have, as well as reliable statements that are consistent with what Bruce Lee could realistically do. And in the second part of this match, we will be including all of Bruce Lee's supposed legendary accomplishments. So using a more grounded Bruce Lee, this fight is pretty even. Despite the 25-pound weight difference between the two, they're actually pretty comparable in striking strength, both falling around the same range, with Conor seemingly having a bit more of an edge. But where they're equal in strength, Bruce is better in speed. Even without some of the hype statements, Bruce was still an incredibly quick and nimble fighter. There are multiple accounts of Bruce Lee more or less just toying with his opponents during professional karate matches, being able to hit them and dodge their punches rather easily. He straight up almost speed blitzes other karate masters and does it with ease. Keep in mind that karate matches are more or less just glorified speed competitions, as the person who gets the point in the match is typically the one that strikes first and strikes fastest. So many of the karate masters Bruce Lee faced would be exceptionally skilled at this, yet Bruce could dodge and attack them before they could even do anything. This means that Bruce is going to be one tough target to even hit for Conor, let alone dodge and block. Even in his sparring videos with his students, where he's likely holding back some, he could pretty easily just throw out a lightning quick jab or kick and catch his students off guard whenever he wanted and essentially just get free points off of it. But in a fight like this, skill will be one of the biggest factors, and in all honesty, I think Conor takes it. Now, it's important to realize that Bruce Lee wasn't some omnipotent, all-knowing, unbeatable martial artist. He was incredibly good at the martial arts he practiced, but not to a godlike or superhuman level. Most of the feats we have for him are just him defeating karate masters in his tournaments and the stuff he wrote about in his books, but otherwise we don't have much actual showings of his skill. Even in his sparring sessions with his students, we could see his students managing to overwhelm and strike him. If some random, nameless, unknown student can fight with and land attacks on Bruce Lee, you can bet Conor can do the same. The only difference being that Conor's punches are going to do a bit more than some unknown skinny kid. Much of the feats we have seen Conor do, such as keep up with literally some of the best karate masters and martial artists on the planet, and win against a majority of them, even managing to hold out against people with ludicrous win-con records like Khabib, is a lot more impressive than anything Bruce Lee could do. Human knowledge in fighting has expanded a lot since the time of Bruce Lee, and training as well as our knowledge on hand-to-hand combat has become far more advanced, meaning that even just your average modern-day mid-level fighter is a lot more skilled and trained for a real fight than even world-class karate masters were back then. Not only that, but the martial arts Conor practices are much more practical in an actual fight. A lot of the martial arts Bruce Lee knows, such as Tai Chi and Wing Chun, aren't too effective in actual combat. Their teachings simply just don't translate to an actual fight, and don't work too well outside of their own sport or against someone with fighting experience. We could see this in modern day videos, as Tai Chi and Wing Chun grandmasters often get rocked by even amateur boxers and MMA fighters. Even actual UFC fighters consider most of the martial arts Bruce Lee practiced really only efficient against untrained people that don't know how to fight. But against other martial artists, these styles don't work too well. Now, that's not to say that none of Bruce Lee's styles would work in an actual fight. He was an accomplished boxer and karate master, which would both be effective here, but a good chunk of the skills he actually knew aren't too helpful in a real fight. Meanwhile, pretty much everything Conor practices is. Keep in mind that UFC fights are structured to be more or less as close to real fights as possible, with a few key rules put into place, so much of the martial arts Conor knows are incredibly efficient in actual fights. But the biggest nail in the coffin in this fight is Conor's ground skill. Of all the martial arts Bruce Lee knows, none of them at all relate to grappling or wrestling. While Conor is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and has plenty of experience in fighting on the ground against some of the greatest ground fighters on the planet. In most situations, ground fighting beats striking martial arts, as although the striker has the advantage while both of them are standing up, once the ground fighter takes them down, the striker can't really do anything. We saw this a lot in the early days of UFC when a lot of boxers would face wrestlers. The boxers could hold their own at first, but eventually the wrestler would manage to take them to the ground and suddenly the boxer became a white belt again, as they aren't trained at all in what to do in that situation. In fact, there's a story of Bruce Lee struggling against a ground-based fighter. A few of the stuntmen on the set of the Green Hornet didn't like how rough Bruce was being with them during some of the stunts, so they asked world-renowned wrestler and judo champion Gene LaBelle to rough him up a bit and to teach him a lesson. Gene would attack Bruce once he got on set, and Bruce Lee was completely unable to do anything against him, as Gene just kept getting him to the ground and restraining him, even carrying him on his back for an extended period of time without any struggle. Keep in mind, Gene was pretty much toying with Bruce, as he saw this as more of a prank than anything else and didn't actually want to hurt him, while Bruce was fully on the offensive as he thought he was being assaulted, yet was completely helpless to Gene and his judo skills. And with Conor being heavier than Bruce Lee by a solid 25 pounds and at least somewhat comparable to Gene in terms of ground fighting experience, it would be virtually impossible for Bruce to do anything. In all honesty, McGregor could probably just throw Lee into a rear naked choke and there would be almost nothing Bruce Lee could even do. This, plus the fact that McGregor has a 5-inch reach advantage, which he will absolutely abuse, and being a far more skilled boxer, since Bruce only boxed in high school, means that Lee is going to be heavily outskilled here, and won't be able to keep up with Conor in a hand-to-hand fight, especially if Conor takes things to the ground. And for those that still disagree with me, Bruce Lee himself admitted that he'd lose to Muhammad Ali, and all that Ali knows is boxing. So throwing McGregor against Lee would pretty much be the same as throwing Bruce against Ali, but if Ali knew how to kick, as well as wrestle and fight on the ground. So against a more grounded and realistic interpretation of Bruce Lee, Conor wins with probably mid-difficulty at worst. This isn't unwinnable for Bruce, because that speed advantage is going to give McGregor a hefty challenge, but in a large majority of situations, Bruce just doesn't have the size or skill to really keep up here. However, Legends Bruce Lee is a completely different story. Not only is Legends Bruce Lee even faster, but he also hits harder than Conor. A lot harder. Bruce Lee punching the 700-pound sandbag with 6,400 joules is absolutely insane, giving him a 6-time striking strength advantage. Every single blow Conor gets hit with will feel like getting hit with a sledgehammer full force, and that won't even be taking into account how big of a speed difference this is. The cameras used back when the Green Hornet was filmed could record at around 24 frames per second, meaning that Bruce Lee could throw a punch and bring it back to himself all within 42 milliseconds. 42 milliseconds! That is some insane fucking speed. That's faster than the world's fastest punch and probably even the world's fastest kick. Even the fastest human reaction times ever recorded don't drop below 50 milliseconds, so there is literally not a single human in history that could ever hope to dodge a punch from Bruce Lee. So unironically, Legends Bruce Lee could just fucking decapitate Conor with a single punch and do it so fast Conor's brain doesn't even fully process it. And God forbid Bruce Lee decides to kick him, as not only can Bruce Lee likely kick as fast as he can punch, since kicks were kind of his thing, but even a weak keep-away move like a side kick could still probably one-shot Conor, let alone something like a roundhouse kick, which for Legends Bruce Lee would probably fall somewhere in the wall level range if we're being honest. Now there are some people that are going to disagree with this because as we discussed, Conor has the skill advantage over Bruce, and there are some people that think that size and strength doesn't matter in a fight because skill can trump any physical differences. And I disagree with that strongly. Probably the best example of this would actually be with Conor himself. A few years ago, Hafthor Bjornsson and Conor McGregor had a sparring match. For those that don't know, Hafthor is the guy that played the Mountain on the Game of Thrones, and is one of the strongest people alive today, being 6'9" and weighing up to 450 pounds at his heaviest. He holds the world record for deadlift at 501 kilograms, has won several strongman competitions, breaking many of the records there, and is overall the third most decorated strongman ever, and is often considered the strongest man to have ever lived. But it's important to keep in mind Hafthor has almost no combat experience. He had a very short-lived boxing career, and that was more a publicity stunt than anything. So this fight was pretty much raw strength versus raw skill, and Hafthor destroyed him. He wasn't affected by any of Conor's punches, he easily overpowered and got a hold of him, and the only reason why Conor ever broke free was because Hafthor let him free. In my opinion, had this been a battle to the death rather than a friendly sparring match, I unironically think that Hafthor could have just crushed Conor to death anytime he wanted. Conor's skill didn't matter at all, as he just wasn't strong enough or big enough to do anything. This is why companies like the UFC have weight classes, which typically differ from 10 to 15 pounds. The UFC is literally a collection of the best fighters from across the planet, yet a 10 to 15 pound weight difference is too much of a strength gap for them to get past. There's only so much skill can do when there are massive differences in physical strength. Now imagine someone just as strong, if not stronger than Hafthor, but far smaller in size, can punch too fast for Conor to physically react to, and is also an accomplished martial artist and highly acrobatic, and you can start to see how this isn't really all that fair. So I think it's safe to say that when accounting for all of Bruce Lee's legends and statements, Bruce Lee destroys Conor McGregor with zero difficulty, and could also stomp John Jones, Francis Ngannou, and probably any human to have ever lived. In all honesty, a more fair match for Legends Bruce would be something like a grizzly bear or a lion more than any human on the planet. But this is just my thoughts. What do you guys think? Do you think Legends Bruce Lee was real? Do you think Conor could still beat Bruce Lee even with Legends? Let me know in the comments, and of course, I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye.